Bhaithlam tosnú ag chuir fáilte faoile chuir chuileghine an seo in Jobh go rélig Ballinrobe an seo an lá starúil ar lá suntasach seo agus méid ag comóra anamnathe na marmh go háirid dó siúd a thug a bheatha agus a hanamna ar son saoirse public na hÉireann. I want to welcome each and every one of you here this afternoon for this very historic and very significant event. Our son, Cuiste Comóra Cuimhnachan Líochan Tourmakeady Ambush, on behalf of the committee of the commemoration of the Tourmakeady Ambush, some of whom I've met actually, we've been meeting on Zoom for the last 4 or 5 months, so I've met a few of them for the first time in the flesh today. So on all of our behalves, we welcome you here. It's quite an emotional occasion. It's a very significant occasion, as I said. 100 years ago, the weather was an awful lot better, I'm told, that the weather was roasting hot this day 100 years ago. But it's such a privilege to have members of the Maguire family. Their families and the Feeney families were intertwined in the lead up to the ambush, but even more so after the ambush, when Tom Maguire married Cltme.ie Feeney, sister of Padraig, whose grave is beside me here today and whose memory we're honouring here today in the cemetery. So I want to welcome Tom and Christina's daughter Mary, her husband and family, the next generation as well. I think Mary reminded me there are 3 generations represented here today. And also Tom Maguire's son, Tom, obviously called after his father, and Tom's wife, Fanula, and all your family as well, the members of the next generation as well. I'm also delighted that members of the May family from here in Ballinrobe, Paddy May's descendants, are here today, represented by his daughter-in-law Geraldine and his granddaughter Joanna and his grandson Des. And Des will recite a poem for us, and Geraldine will read one of the prayers for us as well. So Paddy May, as we know, was also leader of one of the divisions under Tom Maguire's command. 100 years ago, Ireland was in the throes of the War of Independence. The reaction of most Irish people to the Easter Rising of 1916 was that it was the work of a crazy, idealistic bunch of revolutionaries, and their actions had received very little public support. However, following the execution of the leaders of the Rising, the tide of public opinion began to shift. When the British government tried to bring about enforced conscription for Irishmen to go and fight in the trenches of World War I, this had the effect of unifying public opinion even further, leading to the push for independence. The long-awaited promise of Home Rule had vanished with the outbreak of World War I. The traumatic event of the Great Potato Famine in the 1840s, when millions died of hunger or disease or left these shores and the infamous coffin ships, was followed by agrarian unrest, when men like Michael David here in Mayo fought to protect the rights of the small tenant farmers against the might of the unjust landlord system of land ownership. Not far from here, over to my right, on the shores of Lough Mask in 1880, Captain Charles Boycott, an agent for the absentee Lord Earn of Enniskillen, found himself so isolated socially and economically by the people of this locality under the leadership of Father John O'Malley of the Neil, that Boycott felt he had no choice but to pack up and return to England. The decades following the famine saw the foundation of the GA and the start of the Gaelic revival. Slowly, the crushed spirit of a nation began to rise from the ashes of the famine, and the dream of independence from Britain was reawakened. 100 years ago, the Royal Irish Constabulary was the police force charged with keeping law and order in our country. The force was comprised mostly of Irishmen who found themselves in a difficult predicament as they were regarded as the ears and eyes of the enemy. Many of them chose to resign, and some became informers, providing important information for the IRA. And so it was on May the 3rd, 1921, a British Forces supply patrol of a Ford car, backed up by a Crossley tender troop carrier, set out from Ballinrobe to Derry Park RIC barracks on the west side of Lough Mask. Lying in wait for them at Tourmakeady was Tom Maguire from Cross and his flying column made up of 3 sections. The first section, led by Commandant Michael O'Brien from Cltme.ie, was at the Fairgreen. The second section, led by Commandant Tom Lally, took up position at the junction opposite Hewitt's Hotel. The third section, led by Captain Paddy May, lay in wait at Drumbawn Gate. In the ensuing battle, 3 RIC men lost their lives: Constable O'Regan, Sergeant John Regan, and Constable Power, and Constable Oakes, who was a black and tan. Padraig Feeney was the first casualty on the Irish side. He had cycled from Ballinrobe to join his comrades and was captured by the British Crown forces and later executed. Maguire, O'Brien and their men fled across the Partry Mountains and were pursued by Lieutenant Ibbirson. Another gun battle ensued, leaving Michael O'Brien dead, Tom Maguire badly injured from gunshot wounds. Ibbirson too was badly wounded, but both he and Tom Maguire recovered from their injuries. We are here today to remember Thomas Horden, first of all, who was shot dead a little bit earlier on March the 7th as a reprisal for the earlier Cltme.ie ambush, Michael O'Brien and Padraig Feeney, who on this day 100 years ago gave their lives for the cause of Irish independence and freedom. We remember all who gave their lives for this worthy cause. We pray for the families of all who died and all the families involved in the conflict during this troubled chapter of our history. People who often quietly carried the physical and psychological scars with them throughout their lives. Writing about this same period in his book, Troubled Times, War and Rebellion in North Galway, 1913 to 1923, Dr. Jarlath Daigan says in the final paragraph of his very informative book, "The patriotic actions of this dedicated generation of revolutionaries led to the creation of a free and independent state. The tricolour, the soldier's song, and the very word republic symbolised their aspiration for freedom, a freedom that should be cherished in this generation. As we mark the centenary of these events, it is fitting that all victims of war and violence during this period be remembered. Most were ordinary people caught up in extraordinary circumstances in very troubled times." End of quotation. So now we begin our prayer service, our memorial prayer service, and I invite Tom Maguire to read a book that read a reading that many of you will be familiar with from funeral services. A lovely reading taken from the book of Ecclesiastes, where the author is reflecting on the passage of times and seasons and recognising that in God's plan there's a time and a place for everything. So Tom, I hand over to you.
A reading from the book of Ecclesiastes. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. What does a worker gain from his or her toil? I have seen the burden God has laid upon his people. God has made everything beautiful in its time.
One of the aspects of the lives of these young men, of that generation, was their extraordinary faith. There's another video clip being made, or has been made, which will be posted on the website later, of the preparation that the column under Tom Maguire's leadership were making in Kildon and near Cross. And before they set out for Tourmakeady, they made their peace with their God, happy in their conscience what they were doing. They had their confessions heard by 2 local priests. So the faith of that generation was something that was expressed particularly now in the poem that I'm going to ask Paddy May's grandson Des to recite for us. Many of us will have learned it at school, a poem written by Joseph Mary Plunkett, who, as we know, in a few hours before he was executed, married his sweetheart Grace Gifford in the chapel in Kilmainham jail just a few hours before he was executed. And of course that has been captured in that legendary song called Grace, made famous firstly by Jim McCann and more recently by Rod Stewart. So I'm going to invite Des, wherever you are, Des, behind me here, so to recite the poem, I See His Blood Upon the Rose.
I see his blood upon the rose, and in the stars the glory of his eyes. His body gleams amid eternal snows, his tears fall from the skies. I see his face in every flower, the thunder and the singing of the birds are but his voice, and carven by his power rocks are his written words. All pathways by his feet are worn, his strong heart stirs the ever-beating sea. His crown of thorns is twined with every thorn, his cross is every tree.
So, in Ishtamij le shlucht a soskil ne von. She shoch ma achne shiva hort grad a hele fe mar a hug me grad div. Níl gra igéine níos mó ná seo, go dúrtha duine a anam son na cháirde. Sibh sem a cháirde má dhéanann sibh na níthe a ardéim díomh. Ní seirbhíseach a thugam ar a festa, mar ní ód a theirbhíseach gnó a bháistear. Ach thug mé cáirde oribh, or gach a gúla ó maithair chuir mé aniúil díomh é. Ní sibhse a rinne mise a hawa, ach mise a rinne sibhse a hawa. Agus a cheappa hon go nemóisib agus torra a hort agus go martha war dora. I dro cibé ní a ddíotha sibh ar a ahar I manam go dúrtha sé díomh é. I siad seo má achananta díomh siad a hort grá dá chéile. Sinné soscailé. This is the gospel of the Lord. So we're inviting members, various members of the families. Now I won't remember you all by name, but you all know the prayer, each prayer that you've been assigned. So our response to the prayer is actually, it's a line from the writings of Dag Hammarskjöld. He was head of the United Nations one time and was imprisoned. And after he wrote his memoirs, he said, for all that has been, we say thanks. For all that will be, we say yes. Okay? So who's doing? Is it James? James McGuire, that's Tom's grandson, is going to read the first prayer first. As close as you can.
Lord of time and eternity, in remembering the generations that went before us, we recall the sacrifices they made so that we can enjoy the freedom that today we so often take for granted. May we always cherish their courage, their faith, and their love. Response.
For all that has been, thanks. For all that shall be, yes. And next is great grandson, Liam McGuire, read the next prayer, as close as you can, Liam McGuire.
Lord of time, God of eternity, bring healing to our past mistakes, harm done, opportunities squandered, reconciliation not sought for. May the risen Christ bring peace to our memory.
For all that has been, thanks. For all that shall be, yes. So Ruth is Tom's granddaughter.
Lord of time, God of eternity, teach us vigilance in the present, that we may seek out, be alive and responsive to what your Spirit is saying to us, to the hope hidden in everything. Response.
For all that has been, thanks. For all that shall be, yes. Hold on.
Lord of eternity, no, Lord of time, God of eternity, enlighten the future for us, strengthen our resolve, revitalize our vision, ensure our perseverance, and enhance our hope. Response.
For all that has been, thanks. For all that shall be, yes. I assign the next one to somebody whoever is prepared to do it fairly impromptu. What's the first name? Luke, you might read the next one. So Luke, Tom's great grandson, Luke is going to read the next prayer for us. I'll give it to you here if you want. You have it there. That last one. Yeah. Up close to the microphone.
Lord of time and eternity, Grant eternal rest to all who lost their lives through war and violence. Ordinary people caught up in extraordinary circumstances. Today we remember in a special way Michael O'Brien, Padraig Feeney, and all who were prepared to give their lives in the cause of freedom. Response.
For all that has been, thanks. For all that shall be, yes. From us is the Cathaoirleach of our committee from Shra or
Híorna na Hampshire agus na Síoraí. Is weite hagmuid agus mud ag teacht ar a síl agus thugasa a glúsamid ag dearú an tíl. Banni sin onas go méid gcónaí fé thrór an spirid níomh fé bhrat uire an waidin banithe. I ggóladar níomh páric, níomh bríd agus na líomh ilíg.
Here's the cancellation. For all that has been, thanks. For all that shall be, yes. Father, give us the certainty that beyond death there is a life where broken things are mended, where lost things are found, where there is rest for the weary and joy for the sad, where all we have willed of good exists, and where we will meet again our loved ones. So just a moment now we're going to have a laying of some reeds, but I want to just play a little bit background music. So if you just give me a second here. If my phone fallen out here, is it?
Must have fun. It did.
I hope it's still working. Now while the music is playing, we're going to have the laying of the reeds, and then Christina Maguire will finish with the final prayer for us. Let's just see who's laying what reed here now. So the first reed will be laid by Mary Maguire McMonigal, Porrick's niece, on behalf of the Feeney family. That's Mary. The second reed is being laid by Catherine Maguire, Porrick's great-grandniece, on behalf of the Maguire family, Ireland and the United States of America. And on behalf of our committee, Breach Heenahan is also going to lay a wreath now on behalf of the commemorative committee.
It's
one of the darkest chapters of the 20th century, around the time of the Second World War, and one of the greatest monuments to man's inhumanity to man are the infamous concentration camps. When the Allied forces liberated the concentration camps in Auschwitz, a prayer was found written on a scrap of paper in Auschwitz. And now I'm inviting Christina to read that prayer for us, please. This is Christina. Christina Maguire, granddaughter of Thomas. Okay.
Thank you. O Lord, remember not only the men and the women of goodwill, but those also those of ill will. But do not remember all of the suffering they have inflicted upon us. Remember the fruits we have brought. Thanks to this suffering, our comradeship, our loyalty, our humility, the courage, the generosity, the greatness of heart which has grown out of this, and when they come to judgment, let all the fruits that we have borne be their forgiveness. Amen.
Now I'm conscious that as well, just around now, a group of people are gathering in Cong at the grave of Michael O'Brien. Obviously, because of COVID, we weren't able to advertise this as a public event. If we did, I'm sure we'd have had a very large gathering at all of the places. So we're doing what we can within the limits imposed on us. Again, I want to thank all the members of the Feeney Maguire, May family, and anybody else indeed who might be present here as well as the other members of the commemorative committee with our Cathaoirleach, Tomás O'Heenachan and his wife Bríd, and Sean Lydon here. And have we anybody else to the committee here at the moment? Connor, who's recording it all for us here. And so, with the help of God, the weather will be better in 100 years' time when we won't be here, but the generation after us might be. Okay, it's important that we remember that generation, poorly armed, poorly trained, but very courageous, idealistic, and paid a huge price, they and their families. And most of you here are in a better position to speak about that than I am, because you know the prices that your families paid as reprisal for the events of 100 years ago. So Gormila Mahi Glev Gulier, agus Anish, Cltme.ie le Bano. So me Gomanagia il Hochtif Shiv, Aher, Mach, agus Spirit Neve, agus Yeshje Gorau Anamnaha Namarov Ilig. Amen.